December 24th, 1914, the Western Front. World War I has raged for months. Millions are locked in a brutal stalemate. But tonight, something extraordinary is about to happen. The year was 1914. The month was December. For 19-year-old Private Thomas Reed, the world had shrunk to a narrow, muddy trench carved into the frozen Belgian soil. It was Christmas Eve, a day that should have been filled with warmth, family, the scent of his mother's baking back in Manchester. Instead, the air was thick with bitter cold and the metallic smell of damp earth and fear. The Great War had ground to a brutal, miserable halt. Thomas huddled against the trench wall, wool of his uniform scratching his neck, his fingers so numb he could barely feel the worn edges of the letter. This was not the adventure he had imagined. A cold, lonely existence punctuated by the whistle of shells and the distant cough of machine gun fire. He pulled the thin sheet closer, reading his mother's handwriting by a single candle. She wrote of home, his sister decorating the tree, his father saving a portion of Christmas pudding for him. Each line a reminder of a life a million miles away. He missed the simple things. The church bells on a Sunday, a hot cup of tea, not brewed with muddy water, the feeling of a proper bed. He folded the letter, tucking it inside his tunic close to his heart. In the darkness, across no man's land, were the Germans. Boys just like him, equally cold as far from home. Life in the trenches was a cycle of boredom and terror. Days spent waiting, watching, trying to stay warm. Nights filled with shadows and strange noises. Every creak of the duckboards, every rustle in the wire could mean attack. The soldiers were exhausted, crushed by the weight of it all. Death was a constant, grim companion. Thomas looked at the men around him, youthful faces, aged by hardship, weariness etched into bone. They were boys sent to fight a war they barely understood, dreaming of a home they might never see. As the last light faded, stillness fell over the battlefield. The guns, silent after months of roar, an eerie, unnatural quiet. Soldiers gripped rifles, peering into the gloom, expecting a trick. But nothing came. Frost hardened on the ground, their breath turned to mist in the frigid air. Thomas felt a deep ache of homesickness, a longing that was a physical pain. The silence amplified their isolation, reminding each man of all they'd lost and missed. Suddenly, a sound drifted across the frozen wasteland, a sound so unexpected it seemed to belong to another world. It was a voice, then another rising in harmony. It was singing. Thomas and the other men in his trench froze, listening intently. The melody was faint at first, but it grew stronger, clearer, carried on the still night air. They recognized the tune instantly, Stille Nacht, Silent Night. The German soldiers were singing a Christmas carol. It was a moment of pure, startling beauty in a place defined by ugliness and violence. The men looked at each other, their faces a mixture of disbelief and wonder. The war, for a fleeting instant, seemed to have vanished, replaced by this simple, haunting song of peace. A ripple of courage, or perhaps just Christmas spirit, moved through the British line. After a moment of hesitation, one of the older soldiers, a Welshman with a fine tenor voice, began to sing in response. He chose the first Noel, their voices rough but earnest, rising from the trench to meet the German carol halfway. It became a strange and beautiful concert, a back and forth of hymns across the deadly space that separated them. The Germans would sing a verse of one of their carols, and the British would answer with one of their own. The barrier of language, which had seemed so absolute, began to dissolve in the shared language of music and faith. Then, something even more astonishing happened. Small lights began to appear along the top of the German trench one by one, like stars being born in the darkness. They were candles, placed carefully on the tips of bayonets and on the branches of small Christmas trees that the German soldiers had somehow brought with them to the front. The sight was magical, transforming the grim parapet into a festive, twinkling display. A voice called out from the German side, in accented but clear English.
"Tommy, you no shoot, we no shoot!"
The invitation hung in the air, a fragile offering of trust in the most untrusting of places. Slowly, cautiously, heads began to pop up from both sides. silhouetted against the night sky. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the stomach of every man. This could be a trap. It went against every order, every instinct for survival they had been taught. But the pull of curiosity and the desperate hope for a moment of peace were stronger. A German officer, unarmed, climbed out of his trench and began to walk into the middle of no man's land. He was a solitary, brave figure. After a tense moment, a British captain did the same. The two men met in the center, shook hands, and with that simple gesture, the miracle of the Christmas truce began. Thomas Reed watched, his heart pounding. Soldiers began to clamber out of their trenches. They walked towards each other. He followed. His rifle was left behind. He stepped over tangled barbed wire. He moved on to the cratered, frozen ground of no man's land. Minutes before, this had been a place of certain death. Now it was filled with men who should have been his enemies. Their faces showed not hatred. Their faces showed relief. Their faces showed curiosity. A German soldier, no older than Thomas, smiled at him. He offered a hand. Thomas shook it. The man was Hans. Hans spoke very little English. Thomas knew no German. It didn't seem to matter. They communicated with gestures. They communicated with smiles. They communicated with the few words they could muster.
Tonight, no war, only Christmas.
Aye, just for tonight.
Men exchanged small gifts from packages from home. The British shared plum pudding. The British shared cigarettes. The Germans offered cigars. The Germans offered dark bread. The Germans offered schnapps. Simple tokens, offered and received with genuine warmth. Thomas traded a tin of jam from his mother's parcel. He received a beautifully carved wooden bird from Hans. Soldiers pulled out photographs of family. They showed pictures of wives. They showed pictures of children. They showed pictures of parents. They were discovering their shared humanity. Then a football appeared. Someone had kicked it out from the British lines. Soon an impromptu game started. Coats became goalposts. The frozen, uneven ground made for a chaotic pitch. British and German soldiers chased the ball together. They laughed and shouted, uniforms caked in mud. For a brief time they were not soldiers. They were just young men enjoying a game. The sounds of war were replaced by sport and camaraderie. As Bruce Bairn's father later wrote, he couldn't have imagined this scene in his wildest dreams. It was pure, unadulterated joy amid unimaginable despair. The truce also became a time for solemn duty. Together they helped bury the dead left in no man's land. They held joint services. They recited psalms. They recited prayers in English, in German. A moment of profound respect and shared grief. In burying their dead, they acknowledged the terrible cost of war. They honored the lives that had been lost, enemies by order, but in that moment they stood together as men, united by a common sorrow. The battlefield became, for one night, consecrated soil. As the first grey light of Christmas Day crept over the horizon, a reluctant understanding passed between the men. The truce could not last forever. The war was still there, waiting to reclaim them. Officers on both sides knew that this unofficial peace had to end, and the orders were given to return to the trenches. The handshakes became more somber, the farewells more poignant. Thomas and Hans met one last time near the tangled wire. Hans gave Thomas his address on a scrap of paper. Thomas gave Hans a small brass button from his tunic. They promised to look for each other after the war, fragile hope. With a final wave, the soldiers retreated to their respective lines. No man's land was empty once more. The returning silence was heavy with memory. The men looked across the divide not at faceless enemies but at individuals. They had shared songs. They had shared gifts. They had shared laughter. The first shots that eventually rang out felt like a betrayal. One soldier wrote in a letter home, "I think I have seen one of the most extraordinary sights that anyone has ever seen. The war had returned, but something within the men had changed forever." This remarkable event was not an isolated incident. The Christmas truce of 1914 happened spontaneously at many points along the Western Front. It was driven by the soldiers themselves, not their commanders. It proved that the bonds of humanity can endure even in brutal circumstances. The men realized their enemy was not a monster, but someone much like themselves. Cold, scared, longing for home, they chose kindness over conflict, if only for a short while. The story of the Christmas truce remains one of history's most powerful examples of hope. It reminds us that wars are fought by ordinary people who can choose to lay down their arms. This event really happened. It stands as a shining light in the darkness of conflict. It testifies to the enduring power of the Christmas spirit. It proves our shared humanity is stronger than what divides us. The memory of that one night with no war continues to inspire belief in a better world. The Christmas truce reminds us that even in the darkest times, compassion can shine through. Over 100,000 soldiers took part across the Western Front, defying orders to connect as humans. Want to learn more about World War I's untold stories? Subscribe and share for more history brought to life. The war resumed, and the truce was never repeated on this scale. Many of these men wouldn't survive the year, but for one night, humanity triumphed over hatred.